You see it absolutely everywhere, right? Plastered on t-shirts, dorm room posters, coffee mugs, and murals all across the globe. You know the one, the intense gaze, the starred barrettes, the untamed hair. But behind this globally recognized symbol of rebellion is a deeply complex, highly polarizing, and fiercely debated historical figure. In this explainer, our goal is to strip away the pop culture myth and objectively uncover the actual historical facts of Ernesto Guevara de la Serna. We're going to look strictly at the data, the historical timeline, and the documented events to understand exactly what he did and what he truly stood for. Okay, let's dive into this. That iconic image you're picturing in your head right now, it's called Guerrillero Heroic, taken by photographer Alberto Corda back in 1960. It has literally been called the most famous photograph in the world. And yet, the actual life story of the man inside that photo is often completely obscured by the sheer power of the image itself. So, how does a man become an icon? To answer that, we really have to look at how he lived, the ideologies he formed, and the violent actions he both commanded and ultimately fell victim to. Section 1. The Restless Traveler. To truly grasp his radicalization, we have to start long before he ever picked up a rifle. Ernesto Guevara wasn't actually born into poverty. In 1928, he was born to a politically aware, middle-class family in Rosario, Argentina. And what shaped him initially wasn't class struggle at all, but acute asthma. It was a severe condition that he forced himself to overcome through sheer willpower and physical endurance. Fast forward to 1948, and he enters medical school in Buenos Aires. But he was restless. In 1952, he takes a break from his studies and embarks on an incredible 8,000-mile journey across South America, an experience you might know from the book The Motorcycle Diaries. On this trip, the young medical student witnessed staggering, desperate poverty that simply shook him to his core. Later on, in 1954, he found himself in Guatemala, where he witnessed the overthrow of the reformist president Jacobo Arbenz by a CIA-backed military coup. For Guevara, this was the absolute turning point. It cemented a lifelong hatred for capitalism and U.S. imperialism, completely convincing him that armed revolution was the only viable solution. Just listen to this quote from his diary, which is absolutely crucial, because it was written well before he ever became a guerrilla fighter. It shows a highly intense, violently radicalized political ideology forming in his mind. He was already visualizing brutal, uncompromising armed conflict. He was a staunch anti-imperialist and a convinced Marxist. He had the ideology down. But at this point, in the mid-1950s, he was basically just a wandering doctor. He didn't have a battlefield. Section 2. Meeting Fidel Castro. Well, that battlefield and the defining partnership of his life would soon reveal themselves. In the late summer of 1955, in Mexico City, this wandering doctor was introduced to a daring exiled Cuban rebel leader. This rebel was actively plotting an armed return to his home country to overthrow the U.S.-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. His name, of course, was Fidel Castro. Guevara and Castro talked deep into the night, and after just one single conversation, Guevara was convinced. By daybreak, he had signed up as a member of Castro's 26th of July movement. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between these two men. Historians always point out that they were incredibly different, yet those differences ignited something really powerful. Guevara was thoughtful, cold, and viewed the world through a very strict global Marxist framework. Castro, on the other hand, was impulsive, highly emotional, optimistic, and at that specific time, almost exclusively focused on Cuban nationalism rather than global communism. The synergy between them was historic. Think about it. Without Che, Fidel might not have fully embraced communism. And without Fidel, Che might have just remained an idealistic, wandering Marxist theoretician rather than an active military rebel. Section 3. The Cuban Revolution. Together, they set their sights on Cuba, leading to a grueling guerrilla war. But their invasion was a near-total disaster from the very start. In late 1956, 82 men crammed onto an old, leaky yacht called the Granma and landed in Cuba. They were immediately ambushed by Batista's military. Out of those 82 men, only 22 survived to regroup in the Sierra Maestra Mountains. During that initial bloodbath, Guevara famously put down his medical supplies and picked up a box of ammunition. It was a deeply symbolic moment where the doctor officially became a soldier. Up in the mountains, Che proved himself to be a brilliant hit-and-run tactician, earning Castro's deep trust and becoming the very first rebel promoted to the top rank of Comandante. On January 1, 1959, the rebels actually succeeded in overthrowing Batista, and suddenly, these guerrilla fighters were the government itself. Che took on immense power. On one hand, he was the architect of massive agrarian land reform and a nationwide literacy campaign. But on the other hand, he served as the ruthless chief executioner at La Habana prison, where he oversaw military tribunals and firing squads for an estimated 500 suspected spies, Batista loyalists, and deserters. As the new government took shape, he became president of the National Bank, he became Minister of Industry, and he served as a key diplomat who helped secure the Soviet nuclear-armed missiles that sparked the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. This immense power allowed him to try and implement his broader philosophy for society. You see, Guevara wasn't just interested in policy, he literally wanted to change human nature. He theorized the concept of the socialist new man, a society driven entirely by moral duty and self-sacrifice, rather than money or material wealth. He implemented policies based on this vision in Cuba. But relying on moral incentives rather than material ones contributed heavily to a severely faltering economy. By the mid-1960s, frustrated by the economic stagnation and falling out with both Soviet and Cuban leadership over his aggressive desire to export armed revolution globally, Che realized his time as a bureaucrat was over. Section 4. Execution in Bolivia. In 1965, Guevara just vanished from the Cuban public eye. He resigned his posts, gave up his honorary citizenship, and set out to spark revolutions abroad, first failing over in the Congo. By late 1966, he entered Bolivia in disguise, fully intending to overthrow the government of René Barrientos. But the campaign was doomed from the start. Ironically, the master tactician violated his very own published rules for guerrilla warfare. He started fighting prematurely, he failed to secure the backing of the local Bolivian Communist Party, and he utterly failed to win the support of the local peasantry, who instead just reported his movements to the authorities. So he found himself hopelessly isolated in the jungle, facing a Bolivian military that was newly equipped and trained by the United States. The net finally closed in October 1967. On October 8th, his small, starving band of fighters was cornered by U.S. Green Beret-trained Bolivian Rangers at the El Uro Ravine. Che was shot in the leg and captured. The very next morning, he was interrogated in a small schoolhouse by Felix Rodriguez, a Cuban-American CIA operative working directly with the Bolivian army. Now, despite reported CIA preferences to keep him alive for further questioning, the Bolivian High Command ordered his immediate execution. That afternoon, a Bolivian sergeant named Mario Terán was sent into the room with an M2 carbine to carry out the order. To prove his death to the world, Guevara's hands were severed and sent to Cuba, and his body was buried in a secret mass grave where it remained hidden until 1997. According to historical debriefings, when Sergeant Terán entered the room to execute him, the soldier actually hesitated. Guevara, bound and bleeding, stood up and reportedly delivered these famous last words, yelling, "I know you've come to kill me. Shoot, coward. You are only going to kill a man." Terán fired, ending Che Guevara's life at the age of 39, and simultaneously birthing a legend that would outlive them all. Section 5. A polarizing legacy. So, the crucial point is that while the man died in a dusty Bolivian village, his image only grew stronger. History has essentially split Ernesto Guevara into two entirely opposing figures, and you will find staunch defenders of both based on the exact same historical timeline we just reviewed. To the political left, he's a romanticized martyr and a hero. He is Saint Ernesto, a man who fought poverty, opposed imperialism, and willingly died for his ideals, the ultimate symbol of youthful rebellion. But to the political right, and particularly among Cuban exiles, he is a ruthless tyrant. They remember him as the Butcher of La Cabaña, a dogmatic extremist who gleefully promoted authoritarianism, ordered the deaths of hundreds without a fair trial, and tried to spark global nuclear war. We want to leave you with this final thought, which is perhaps the greatest paradox of his entire story. Che Guevara despised capitalism. He viewed material wealth as a sickness and championed the self-sacrificing new man. Yet today, his face is one of the most commercialized graphics in human history, bought and sold on millions of consumer goods every single day. How does a Marxist guerrilla, whose life was literally defined by his hatred of the free market, become one of its most profitable, universally merchandised brands? It's definitely a question worth asking the next time you see that famous face staring back at you.